Hello, everyone, and welcome back. We're here in the studio for our next episode of the Property Investment Australia podcast. I am one of your co-hosts, Lachlan Vidler, and I'm joined, as always, by my good friend and, opposite chair sitter, Will Sanchez. Will, what's going on, mate? How you doing?
Yeah, pretty good.
Yeah?
Yeah, been stuck in the house for the last week and a half.
Yeah, you were saying before we came in, the rains.
Yeah. Oh, my God. Let's not start this subject otherwise.
It's funny, I feel like it didn't, I don't know if I've just been so busy that I haven't been looking at the news properly or something, but I feel like all the rains and everything just didn't get as much coverage as some other sort of natural disaster type things tend to, right? Like it's, like whenever bushfire season comes around, you just see it just like inundates.
It's everywhere.
Everywhere, or like, you get like the Queensland type flooding or something and it's everywhere. I don't know.
Maybe because there's something more attractive in the news.
I guess it has been election rate cuts. There's been a whole bunch of stuff. Mate, yeah, you know what? Maybe it's just a bad news cycle for
people don't want bad news.
Our poor Central Coast folk.
Yeah, oh my
doing
God,
it tough. But
let's not go there.
So, mate, we got an awesome episode that we're going to dive into very, very shortly, and it's going to be all around the fact that we're 2 rate cuts in and what's going to happen next. But before we do, our wonderful producer has let us know coming in, and it shows, I don't know, maybe it's the fact I'm obviously getting older, not quite at your pedigree yet, but mate, I didn't even realize that there was comments on Spotify now.
Yeah, it's a new
I didn't
feature.
even know. Yeah, I mean, so
feature.
I'm the only one that didn't realize. But
Come on, man.
I know, right? It's I'm not kidding. I have so many grey hairs coming in right now. It's mate, I'm gonna be salt and pepper.
They sprout. Don't worry.
But mate, we got some shout outs going on. So we had Megan Tracy leaving us some very nice feedback. Thank you, Megan Tracy.
Thank you.
Naturally, a couple of people who don't always agree with everything, and somebody called out the fact that they wanted us just to get to our points. And I think what I have to say to that is, well, that's the beauty of the fact it's our podcast. We can waffle on as much as we want. And you know what? The reason that sometimes we have a bit of a chat and we get around and we take some circles is because we love what we do. We love what we do and we want to share our thoughts, our expertise. And sometimes it is a bit like Canberra, where there's a lot of roundabouts, but we always get to our destination in the end. Do you like that one?
That. Yeah, you get a comment for that.
So for those that don't like the waffle, we do try to keep it professional and keep it on point and short and sweet. Yeah. But you know what? We'll call it creative license. What do you reckon?
Oh, I agree. Couldn't agree more.
Couldn't agree more.
Can you imagine just bullet points? Bang, 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 bang.
It'd be pretty boring.
Yeah, exactly.
There'd be no energy. It'd be a little bit how you going.
They get to know. They get to know us a little bit better
as
well.
And you know what? In fairness, we get a lot of clients that come out of this podcast. And I reckon the most common feedback that I personally get out of it is they like the fact that it feels like they get to know us.
Yeah, absolutely.
So anyway.
It's cozy.
It is cozy, and it's, now we're getting into this wintry weather. But mate, we've got an awesome episode coming up. Like I said, 2 rate cuts in. What is going to happen next? But if you'll allow me, I got 2 really, really exciting things I'd just like to share with everybody before we dive in, if you'll allow me.
Absolutely.
So the first one is I'm very, very excited to say that I have been in discussions with Channel 9, and I am going to be joining the team over at Budget Battlers, which had their first season last year. Fantastic results. Millions of viewers on it. I'm going to be joining their team for the upcoming season later this year as their investment expert. So
congratulations.
Thank you, mate.
I'm already hooked.
You're already hooked?
Absolutely.
I'll send you over the episodes and you can get in front of it. But huge year going to be happening as we start filming, and then it comes out towards the back of the year. But really exciting things happening over at Atlas for that. And the second thing is that I just want to get out in front early. We've actually started our end of financial year offer. We started it in May, and you know why?
What is that?
We sat back and we thought, you know what? The end is approaching. Everyone always starts it in June. We understand that sometimes it can take a few weeks for people to make a decision. So we're going to give them a couple of extra weeks. So our end of financial year offer, there are T's and C's. So when you go and have a chat with my team, and you can go and have a chat with them over at atlaspropertygroup.com.au, There are T's and C's, so make sure you mention the fact that you heard on the podcast about the end of financial year offer. But we're offering, up to $1,500 off our service fees, along with like I said, the T's and C's. But that means for a lot of people, if you've been sitting on the fence, I think this episode is going to be really good talking about what's going to happen next. If you've been sitting on the fence, make sure you come have a chat because we've got that nice end of financial year deal going. And who wouldn't want to save,
Oh, absolutely.
Bit of money.
I wouldn't.
Right? So that's my two announcements.
Yeah.
My two announcements.
Pretty good start.
Well,
Sizzling hot.
Sizzling hot. Well, I don't want to cop any more comments about not getting into it. So make sure we dive in.
Yeah. Let's stop being Canberra now.
Alrighty. So 2 rate cuts in. What's going to happen next? I mean, from what I'm seeing, the market has been shifting. It started shifting towards the start of the year as we saw the first cut. Everybody felt pretty confident about this second cut. It's now, it hasn't been too long since that second cut happened. And, for me, the common conversation I'm hearing is what's going to happen? Are we in a recovery, right? There was a lot of markets around the country that didn't perform as well when rates were going up. There was lots that performed amazing, right? But if you really weren't investment savvy, didn't have a good buyer's agent, for example, or you tried to go it alone, there were a lot of markets that were flat or did even dip a little bit. So are we in a recovery? Are we in a new boom? Or are we in something else entirely? What's your thoughts? If you were to give 25 words or less.
25 words or less. I think it's maybe a mini boom, maybe.
You think it's maybe a mini boom, hey?
I think.
Yeah? You're seeing a lot of traction at the moment, are you?
Absolutely.
Yeah?
Yeah, the open homes, lots of people. Even where we live, we are getting so many leaflets, agents trying to buy a property all the time because there's no properties being listed. And that's which makes it a little bit scary for people trying to get in because some people are just trying to pay ridiculous prices to get in.
Yeah.
And especially the ones getting out of Sydney, cashed up, they're moving to the coast and they're willing to pay big bucks. Obviously not as much as Sydney, but they're paying big bucks and there's no listings.
Yeah.
So we've got every month, kid you not, you go there, end of the month, and there's 3 different agents. Yeah.
Well.
And that tells you.
Yeah. Bit of heat getting around. Well, it's interesting, And you know what? Maybe it's not even a mini boom. Maybe it's just a boom, flat boom, big boom.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to tease that question. I want to tease that out there because I'm not going to tell you what I think. I think we're going to go through the episode, talk about a few of these impacts, and we'll let people make up their own mind as we get towards the back end. How's that sound?
Yeah. Fair enough.
So let's take a bit of a look at, what do rate cuts actually signal, right? And at their core, the reason rate cuts occur is because the economy may be starting to get put into a position that the government doesn't want it to be in, right? And rate cuts that are done proactively are designed to do it, to occur so that changes in the economy can happen at a much faster rate and ideally at an earlier time before any negative, economic circumstances actually happen, right? And the reason why it's such a big lever is because for those of you that don't maybe actually understand the way that rate cuts work, what happens is all the big banks around Australia borrow money from each other and other sources, and also the Reserve Bank, right? And the Reserve Bank can be a major funder of the major banks, right? So when they cut the cash rate or when they change the cash rate, it's actually changing the rate at which banks can access money from the RBA, right? So banks have got to make money. So the rate that they borrow from the RBA, they've then got to add something on top, which is the rate that you then pay. And that difference, that margin, is the profit for a bank, right? And obviously they've got expenses, so it might not be an exact profit. Maybe a better term is revenue, but that is how banks end up making a large chunk of their money. So when the cash rate changes, the idea is, and especially if we talk about it going up, for example, is that lending becomes more expensive to the banks. Then lending becomes more expensive to the consumer because banks have to lend it at a higher rate. The biggest expense in most people's lives is property, their mortgage, right? So when the cost of servicing that mortgage goes up, the theory is that, and I'm trying to simplify it here. There are obviously a million other factors that go into it, but the theory is basically that if you're already spending upwards of, maybe 30% or more in a lot of cases these days of your income servicing your home loan, you're now going to have to pay more on top of that because the rate's gone up. And now you have less disposable income. So if you have less disposable income, you have less money to spend, which means if the economy is moving too fast, i.e. inflation, then less money gets spent, which means less goods or services are bought or traded. So therefore, prices don't go up as much because there's less demand. So to get people to buy the same loaf of bread or whatever, they actually need to lower prices because not enough are getting sold. And therefore, we stop inflation, right? So if you flip it, then you go the other way and you go, well, now maybe we've gone too far and the economy is slowing. So if the economy is slowing, how do we stimulate it? Well, we want to make people's biggest expense, their home, cheaper. So if their home is then cheaper, although the smart decision would be to save that excess money, most people aren't, and they're going to go and spend it, right? And that could be linked into cost of living issues, right? So now they can actually buy more food, or now they can, splurge on a slightly nicer steak or something like that. But the reality is that most people don't end up saving that gap. So they end up spending it. More spending means more demand. More demand means more people fighting over those same...
That's good for the economy.
Yeah, exactly right. So then people can increase their prices, right? And then that's inflation. So inflation is always going to exist. The point is we don't want rampant inflation. So I think, at the peak of COVID, it got very, very high. Like we were up around the 7s, 8s, 9s, even 10s on some goods, more. Some goods were going at, 20, 30% higher, but overall inflation wouldn't have hit that. That's too high, right? And that's why the RBA sets the range at 2 to 3%. And that's basically nice, steady growth that allows people to, in a perfect world, increase their incomes, life is better, all the rest, right? So I wasn't actually planning to talk about any of that, but here we go.
That was pretty good.
Here we go with the waffle.
It was a lesson.
Yeah, do you like that?
Yeah, it was a lesson. Yeah, it was good. I like it.
So that's what rate cuts are around. And I think it's often misunderstood. People don't actually understand why they might go up or why they might go down or why they might stay the same, right? So if we go to what they signal, right, they aren't just financial, they're also psychological, right? Because if you think about it, when rates are going up, the psychological impact is that people are going, I got to tighten my belt, right? And of course that there is a financial impact to that, but it's more the psychological of people going, oh, I can't buy this now, I can't do that, I can't go on a holiday. And the reality is they might actually be able to, but psychologically it hits them, And then when rates are coming down, you get the positive psychological impact. People are going, oh, things are getting easier. I can buy more. I can treat myself that little bit better.
Yeah, let's forget about it. Have fun.
Have fun, right? Or maybe in the really smart people's minds, they're thinking, now I can buy that property. Now I've been saving so hard. Now that rates are coming down, maybe my borrowing is now increased. Now you can really dive in, right? Mm-hmm. But obviously, that's people who have really good habits established. They aren't just spenders.
Yeah.
So what we see is, if you look back in history, and I've already bored everybody with the education on why rate changes happen. So I won't bore them with this. But basically, if you go back and look at history, there is quite a strong trend of when rate cuts start to happen, of a noticeable increase in the performance or growth of properties, of property markets. So that...
But wouldn't you say that's supply and demand as well?
Well, that's it's a big link, right?
Yeah,
Like, and typically I would say it's going to increase on the demand side of the equation, right?
But potentially triggered by the emotional.
For sure. And that's the
I
thing,
think
right?
that's what
Is
he's
that
saying,
like
yeah.
it's obviously financial, but there is a big psychological element because that's the thing. Rates went up. I always forget the number, but I think it was 13 times, right? And yet people could still buy property, right? Like we were servicing heaps of clients that were everyday people, talking like school teachers,
Mm-hmm.
tradies, cops,
Mm-hmm.
like people with relatively normal levels of income. We're not talking about the lawyers, the doctors, the high income earners. So even when that was happening, you could still do it. But psychologically, a lot of people felt like maybe we can't do it or we shouldn't do it.
Yeah.
But now, or when you see the cuts, you look back in history, right? It's that psychological side, right? And then that increases the demand side of the equation, which tends to have that flow-on impact, right? But in saying that, if you really think about it, when rates go up, development is hard to do because money is not as cheap.
Yeah.
So I don't actually have anything to back this up. This is one part I didn't look at before in my prep for this episode. But I would hazard a guess that if you also went back and looked, demand was probably a little bit more supply was probably a little bit more constrained because developers wouldn't have had as much access to capital, so projects wouldn't have stacked. So supply was probably also constrained because things weren't getting done.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we've seen right now. Projects aren't going ahead. The government's got their, and I'm going to call it just an absolutely ridiculous target of home building. They haven't even come close to meeting it yet.
But it always happens.
Of course it does. And it's I mean, yeah, we won't get into government inaction, but I guess to my point around development, the biggest issue is that it's hard to get things to stack up.
Mm-hmm.
We're seeing that now, and I would hazard a guess if I actually went back and looked, you'd see that in the past as well. So you probably get the double effect of supply and demand, but they do spark momentum, and typically before the data reflects it, because most data is lagging.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You're getting property data, like realistically, you think, right? Any company that's like the big companies in Australia that provide the big property market data, right? First, you've got to have a month that goes by, right? So you've already got 4 weeks going on, right? From the first week of that month, you've got 4 weeks that goes by. Then they've got to collect that data, clean it up, put it into a usable format, and then get it out to somebody like us who might pay for the data. That could take another 2 to 3 weeks.
Yeah.
So by the time you get data, best case, it's probably
It's 2 months.
it's reflecting like almost 2 months, right? So the data lags, and if people wait necessarily to see all the data, and especially when you're not an expert in it to be able to kind of see what things that might be changing, you can be months and months behind the 8 ball, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, that's what rate cuts tend to signal. So, I mean, maybe you can kick us off on the next part. Like what we're seeing on the ground. What are you seeing on the ground now that we've seen one rate cut and the time between that, and now we've seen the second one? We're a few weeks after that now. What are you seeing on the ground in terms of how the rate cuts have been affecting things from the start of the year through the second cut now?
Yeah, absolutely. We've seen a big increasing number of inquiries. A lot of first home buyers trying to get into the market as well. The inquiries are actually converting. Because a few months ago, there's lots of inquiries, but people are not making the move. So I think it goes to what you said about the sentiment as well. So people are feeling like, well, I should make the move. As we approach the end of financial year as well, they want to qualify for that sort of income bracket to be part of the first home loan deposit scheme. If there's no changes to that yet to see. But yeah, absolutely, lots more pre-approvals being done. So all in all, I'd say it's increased significantly. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Sentiment,
The first home buyer aspect, and I'd say my opinion on that would be probably a lot of first home buyers have been sitting on the fence. Rates have had their first drop, they've now had their second drop. That obviously increases borrowing by a chunk. Like, I mean, the 2 rate cuts.
But not only that as well, sorry to cut you there, but not only that, but the fact that the rates are coming down very soon, if obviously it keeps going
Yeah.
towards that trajectory, it makes more sense to to pay them to rent in some pockets,
Yeah.
right? If you do the numbers, and I think in fact I saw it on the news a couple of days ago. They actually picked some places around New South Wales where it made more sense to buy to live than to rent, because if the rates keep going down, then it could happen. No one knows, but that doesn't suggest what you should be doing, but it's just what we see.
But that's a natural part of the cycle, right? Because like rents get so expensive that people realize that either it's literally cheaper to buy, or the gap between the renting and the buying is so negligible that people want to have that emotional attachment to a property. They want to buy it, right? And then prices get so expensive, and then you keep going around the cycle. And, home prices get so expensive that people go, why would I do this when I can rent for like a third of the cost, a quarter of the cost? So then prices plateau because more people are willing to rent, and it just goes round, right? But I think, just back on that the first home buy thing. I think that I think it would be very emblematic of the fact that like a lot have had to sit on the sidelines. You know, if you think first home buyers are typically not at their peak earning potential, even if they're getting help from, the bank and mum and dad and things like that, the reality is that a lot of them have probably been priced out, but a lot of them are now probably thinking, well, rates have started to come down. We're down 50 basis points now. They're going to keep coming down. We don't know how far yet, but like there's probably at least over that. I mean, you think between now and the end of next year, there's probably at least another 3 cuts, at least, if not maybe a fourth between now and then, right? Not including the ones we've had, right? So over the next
Around
18 months.
The 1% reduction, you reckon?
No, I reckon it could be more. Like 1% would be from peak. That'd be 2 more. I reckon you could get towards 1.5.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah. But like I'm talking about over the next 18 months, right? Like from peak to trough, or maybe close to trough. But yeah, I think my point on the first home buy thing is that I think that like, for them, it's like, well, let's get in now before prices like continue to skyrocket, because there's been a lot of places that have
the issue.
continued to move. So it's like, well, it's probably the absolute edge of our affordability right now. But then if we have another 0.5% to a full percent from now reduction, it then comes into a better swing. Combine that with the fact they're probably mid to late 30s typically now, like that's how much it's changed. Their earning is only going to get better, or should be only getting better. So if you think over the next like 3 to 4 years, they might have a further 1% swing, plus maybe an extra 30, 40 grand of pay increases across, like each. Like you get the swing, right? That's probably.
But along with that, the price increases as well.
Yeah, and then exactly right, and then you get the value increase of property, right? So I think like from my point of view, I would imagine that's probably the way a lot of the first home buyers are sort of thinking and seeing it. I guess on my end, like what we're seeing is, man, it's like if I'm being really honest, like it's pretty tough out there. Like we do it professionally, and we're often still up against multiple offers, right? Like if you're talking about markets that are good to be investing in, that make sense, it's competitive.
Yeah.
And you think like, if we're doing it professionally and we get to do it all hours of the day, like obviously I'm sure people are going to think like, oh, well, he runs a buyer's agency and a pretty good one. Like obviously he's going to say you should be using a buyer's agent, but I'm not saying it for that reason. If we work all hours of the day to do it, if you're trying to go it alone, like let's be real, like how do you think you're going to beat out a professional?
Yeah, but to your point, I've started to recommend buyer's agents for first home buyers as well.
But that's the point, right?
Because you simply cannot. I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
Last week, I had a client of mine, pre-approved, scheme issued, ready to go, found a property. A time-waster agent just made him sign a contract, and then went and did some, phone bidding war.
Yeah.
And then got $1,000 more with someone else in exchange with the other bloke. Like $1,000. Can
Yeah.
you imagine? Like $1,000. Like,
But
why would you do that to your?
of course,
Like 1,000.
of course. Well,
Just go back to the guy and said, mate, we will close at that point. But no, he made him sign the contract, went behind his back, and then
Yeah.
got $1,000 more. Like, oh, congratulations, well done, mate.
yeah.
No matter what Chess opinion on, it's crazy.
But and I guess that's my point. Like when you've got so many professionals now occupying the marketplace at both investment and owner occupier level, but I'm talking about especially investment, especially when the numbers matter, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like if you're going to go at it alone and you've never bought a property, like let's be real. Like let's say you've bought 5 properties in your life, and you're like, you know what? Compared to all my friends and family, I'm a bit of a superstar. Like like it doesn't matter. Like could be an owner occupiers, it could be an investment. Doesn't matter what it is. But like let's say you've traded 5 properties in your life. Like being frank, congrats. One of my team does that in a week.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, exactly.
You know, like, and I'm not saying that to like big notice or anything, but I guess my point is more that like, in terms of what we're seeing on the ground, like it's hard enough doing it in a professional capacity, let alone trying to do it after hours when you've just done a full day at work. You spend 20 minutes scrolling realestate.com a couple of nights a week, and then like you think you're going to be able to get in and kind of jag a deal, you know? And that's, I guess, probably like the sum up of the fact, like there is so much momentum right now. It is insane. Like we were trying to work, like we got a client.
Momentum as in competition.
Literally, like we have a client, and like good news, and like by the time this comes out, I think like, you know, for everyone listening, this will come out about a week after we finish recording this. For this client, I'm not kidding, we have missed out on 3 properties in the last week for him, maybe a week and a half, right? Fortunately, today I got told the contract's been issued for the 4th one, which thank God, because you know I feel bad for the guy. Like he's gotten, you know, we get to buffer that emotion out for them, but like at the end of the day, he still had to review a bunch of properties. But that's the kind of heat, you know. And he said to us, he's like, guys, like I'm glad you're doing all the legwork, because all I've had to do is review reports. You know, you send me through a report, you tell me about it, I say yes, you go, you've missed out. Fortunately, I don't have that much emotional attachment to it, but he was like, if I had to do it myself, like I'd probably be feeling pretty burnt right now, and I probably just wouldn't bother, you know? So what we're seeing on the ground from my point of view, I guess to sum it up, with especially the rate cuts, because that's the premise of the episode today, especially with the rate cuts, the heat is unimaginable. Like it is just unimaginable. There's so much energy going on. It's like, it's insane. Like it's really, really insane. And yeah, and that probably leads me into the next section, which is going to be what could happen over the next 6 to 12 months. Should we?
Yeah, bring it on. Should
we just kick it forward?
Yep.
So from where I sit, you know, on my golden ivory property market tower, you know, getting to see all these markets around Australia. That was a joke, by the way, for everybody. I definitely don't have an ivory tower. From where I'm sitting, like I think that there are 3 hypothetical scenarios, right? So the first one is a bit of a steady recovery, right? And recovery is a loose term because, like, as everybody knows, I've talked about it a million times, there's no one property market. Heaps of markets have performed exceptionally over the last 12, 24 months when rates were moving up and all the rest. We actually just got an awesome valuation back, by the way. We bought for a client. This is insane, right? This client did nothing to the property. We bought, and in 3 months, it's up $100,000.
3 months.
3 months, it's up $100,000. And it was like, I can't remember the exact purchase price, but we're talking like, it was like a 550, 600K property. It's up $100,000 in 3 months.
Wow.
And that was straight from the bank. And yes, somebody's going to say, oh, well, it was probably like a really nice valuation, all the rest. Doesn't matter. The bank's funding it. So at the end of the day, the bank's willing to take the risk. So if they're funding it based on the 100K, it's legit. You know, like this isn't a real estate. So yeah. But then we've had just countless, right? Countless over the last, 12 to 24 months, like people just banging out 100 to 150K as the standard 12-month result on a 5 to 600K property. Like insane. So anyway, a bit of an aside, but we could have a steady, you know, recovery in loose terms, right? Where it's like, you know what, there's just like a little bit of momentum in there, and you know, it's just slow and steady, right? That's potentially scenario 1.
Slow steady is good.
Look, slow and steady is better than slow and bad, so or fast and bad. Scenario 2 is a boom of sorts, right? And what I would characterize that is, you know, an above average movement for a lot of markets. You know, not just like one or two, but an above average above average movement in a chunk of markets, right? Or number three could be a bit of a false start, right? Where it's like, yep, we've been seeing for the last probably 6 months or so at like an aggregate kind of national and or state level that like things are moving, but maybe it plateaus. You know, it's a bit of a false start, and there kind of isn't actually the energy that gets back into it. It just kind of flatlines, you know? I don't think it shrinks back, but flatline, right? So they're kind of the three scenarios, right? And for me, I honestly see the boom scenario as the most likely. And I'll tell you why, right? We are dealing with the continuing critical shortage of properties, right? Continuing. It's just like, it's insane. Government sets targets, government fails targets month one, right? And government's still failing targets, right? We are seeing, and we're about to see the introduction of the new federal first home buyer 5% deposit scenario, right? Where they basically just want to give every first home buyer let them buy based off 5%, and the government's going to just take the risk on and support them in that respect, right? That's insane. Like don't get me wrong, if you're struggling, it's great for you at an individual level. But at a market level, that is wild. Like, that is absolutely wild that people are going to be able to buy based off the 5% with government support. And from what I've seen, it's going to be a pretty loose criteria applied to it, because their whole premise they took the election was they want all first home buyers to be able to access it. Like, that's insane. Like, think about how much demand that is going to drive, especially as rates keep coming down. Like,
now what happened to the prices?
That's what I mean. Like, A, we're dealing with a critical shortage, and B, we're now going to have
another variable added to the equation
on the demand side, right? So we add that into the mix. We then add into the mix that despite what people may have seen in the media, a lot of markets performed very well over the period that like rates were going up. And those markets are continuing to perform because they are still affordable. They're still affordable for a large chunk of people. And the rate cuts, all they're really doing is making it affordable to a bigger chunk of people. Because somebody who can afford $900 to invest can still also then afford $700 or $600. But the people who could only afford $500 can now maybe afford $600, right? But the 900 person can now afford $1 million, but they can still afford the 600K property. So all you're doing is adding in a bigger pool of people. And now people who could buy could buy at a higher price point, maybe they are now getting into the territory that they can buy two, right? Yeah. So it's a real perfect storm of these circumstances. Combining that with the sentiment changes that we're seeing, like people are quite happy. You know, people are like seeing the good news that's sort of coming forward out of that, right? Like it's quite attractive to them. So to me, that's huge. I think that the biggest factors to be really watching out for, though, is going to be A, this first home buyer thing I was just mentioning. B, APRA. Rates are coming down. However, APRA controls, the biggest thing they control that is probably a factor in this is the buffer rates. Which you
tell me about it.
Which you obviously know all about, but basically APRA sets the buffer rates, which is like the minimum rate that people will be assessed for on their mortgage, right? So it's like you might see a sticker that says 5%, but you're not getting assessed at 5%, and that rule comes from APRA, right? That policy comes from APRA.
A lot of people would have heard assessment rate.
Assessment rate, exactly right. Mr. Mortgage Broker, it's, right in your wheelhouse, right? But I don't personally think APRA is going to jump in, at least not for a while. But it's a wild card, right? Like especially if, and considering some of the other factors that I'll talk about, rate cuts may not make sense, but a change to the buffer rate or the assessment rate may, you know, even like a 0.5% change. Because we're seeing at 3%, right? We're seeing at 3% right now.
Yeah,
same. Yeah, shrinking to 2.5%, you know?
Yeah, but the banks always find ways to sort of be more flexible in terms of policies, lending criteria, depending on the sentiment. If the sentiment is good, everyone's trying to buy, obviously they become more flexible. Yeah. Like you see some banks announcing like different policies that they wouldn't do like before when the rates were higher. Now they're just getting into debt to income, property types as well. Yeah. property shares, like
Yeah.
some stuff that we see. So,
For sure.
but yeah,
I guess the big
all
thing is,
driven by
though,
the sentiment.
for sure. Well, I guess the big thing is, though, is that, like, for example, you might need a really good mortgage broker to help, like, be able to massage the bank into a deal they might not have normally done, right? So at an aggregate level, right, at a macro level, it still is probably not going to impact too many people, right? Like the internal bank changes, because if you don't know how to push or you don't have somebody advocating for you, the bank might just still turn you away, right? But something like an APRA change is going to happen at a macro scale. So it means everyone is going to feel that impact, regardless of if you got the best broker, the worst broker, direct to bank, another option. So I think that when it changes at a macro scale like that, it can obviously be huge, right? But yeah, so I think APRA, a bit of an X factor, does something happen? I don't think it will.
I've got some clients who work for APRA.
Yeah, do you?
They left some good reviews,
Oh.
which leads me to believe it was I did everything by the customer.
Yeah, I'm probably thinking, all right, no, he's ticked the boxes. We're all good. We're all good. But we have APRA. We then have inflation, right? Like it's trending in a good direction, but one or two bad policy decisions can have it stall or start to increase. That's one. Sentiment, I can't see people getting too upset if rates keep coming down. But sentiment, as we're talking about, right, cuts are just as much psychological as they are financial. If sentiment was to shift, that can also be at play. You mentioned lending criteria. And then also, and probably quite a large impact, is just kind of the global economic scenario, right? We're seeing tariffs, trade wars, actual wars.
Tariffs.
Yeah.
It's the word of the moment,
Isn't it? Right? It might be like each of the dictionaries put out their word of the year. Maybe tariff ends up being the one
if you've got crypto, people are loving it.
Yeah.
What's going on?
Yeah. Right.
What's going on?
So, but yeah, the global the global economy can have big impacts. Like if China keeps getting whacked by the US, right? China is one of our biggest trading partners. They rely heavily on our resources, like mining resources. We do, there's like animal exports, like beef and things like that.
Okay.
They decimated our wine industry a few years ago when they put huge tariffs on that. But China's one of our biggest trading partners. So if the US was to put China in a bit of an awkward spot, that could flow on to us, right? So that's probably some of the biggest factors that I see that could impact the market. But, I think my resounding message before we move on to the final part, which is about what smart investors are doing and how they're managing it, is at an individual level, you can't change any one of those factors. And one of those factors is always going to exist, if not multiple, right? There's always going to be a bad economy, or there's always going to be a new trade conflict between countries. They're always going to exist. So you need to make sure that you're not always looking for what's the reason not to invest. You need to be looking at what are you doing to make the best steps forward, because you can't
What's
change
the cost of not doing anything
Exactly right.
now?
Exactly right. So anyway, that's my thoughts. Any passing final thoughts from you before we move on to the last section?
No, I think that's it.
That's it. All right. Well, guys, let's round it out, right? So what are smart investors doing? I think that for me, the overarching message is preparation. Preparation is key, because if you're planned, you are set up, right? So rates are coming down. What's the first and most obvious thing? Recheck your borrowing, go chat with Will, recheck your borrowing, because different lenders assess things in different ways, as I'm sure you can attest to. Different lenders are obviously moving faster. Their policies change as well. So just because you might see a LinkedIn post that says, each 25 basis points might be anywhere from 30 to 50K of borrowing that goes up. And you think, oh, well, I could only borrow 100K. I've had 2 rate cuts. Maybe best case, it's an extra 100. You don't know what a different lender is going to say to you. And it doesn't mean your 100 is now only 200. It could now be 350. It could be more. It's, the smart investors are going to check that. What would you
No,
you
I
agree?
couldn't agree more. You got to be ready. Because nothing that you do in the lending space will be overnight. So you gotta start.
So true.
You gotta start, because by the time you go speak to us, for example, by the time you provide all the documents, by the time you get an application ready, by the time the banks have approved it, it's another 2 weeks, 3 weeks maybe.
Yeah.
And then the property prices are still increasing, and we still haven't started, you know,
Yeah.
making offers. So preparation is key, like you said.
Yeah.
Reach out, start as soon as you can.
Yeah.
Especially if you're one of those people who have equity sitting in your property and then
Yeah.
you're gonna have to access it. It's best not to wait. Just get ready, get prepared, do the evaluations, do everything up front,
Yeah.
and be ready for when the time comes, you can snatch it.
Oh, you stole what I want to say. I couldn't agree with you more. Man, I love what you said. Nothing in the finance space is done overnight. Like, I think the best example of that is something like equity. Like, go and draw your equity. Like, you're probably going to get a good valuation at the moment. You're going to have more borrowing than you probably have. You're definitely going to have more borrowing today than you would have had 12 months ago. So, doing things like drawing your equity, because like repositioning your finances for an opportunity that comes up, let alone being active, like saying like, oh man, I'm going to go invest. I'm going to go talk to Atlas, or I'm going to go do this. Like, repositioning your finances to be ready is so crucial, so crucial, right? Like, it's insane. But I think, like, to round it out, the biggest thing is smart investors are acting. They're doers. They're not people that sit back and wait. They're active. They're not passive. And active could be drawing your equity. Active could be getting your borrowing reassessed. Active could be buying that opportunity.
Even evaluation.
Yeah. That's what I mean, even about, right? But the best and smartest investors are always actively doing something, because they know that the best time was yesterday, and they know and they can see, and hopefully they're listening to the podcast and they're hearing about, some of my thoughts and your thoughts around what's going to happen. But they're thinking and acting strategically, and they're doing it decisively as well. They're jumping in. So, mate, I reckon we could call stumps there.
Beautiful.
Call it for today.
That was a good episode.
Good episode.
Yeah.
Self-rated. You can leave a self-comment on that one. Hey, Will, you did a great job.
Mate.
Well, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. I hope that we hope that you enjoyed the episode. I think it's definitely something very topical about what comes next from the rate cuts. So the parting message I will leave you with is keep those 5-star reviews coming in. Please feel free to drop some nice comments for us. We'd love to see the nice ones. But if you do have good feedback for us, not just trying to drag us down, please feel free to leave that as well, or send us an email with it. We'd love to keep refining the show and giving you guys what you'd want to listen to, right? So, but most importantly, drop the 5 stars, yeah? That's what we want to see. So, before we wrap up, we talked a lot about action and doing things and being strategic and not being passive, and also the fact that the market is going to be going absolutely insane. It's already going insane, but it's going to be going absolutely wild, over the next few months and towards the back of the year as things keep happening. So, if you're looking for that help on the finance, go chat with Will and his team over at Aussie Newtown, right? You can get their details out of the episode and the show bio, or you can just do a good old Google search for Aussie Newtown. Make sure you go have a chat with them. And if you're looking to have a chat with us, you're looking to start or keep growing your portfolio, you want a strategic plan, we've just brought out our brand new portfolio modeling tool. It's absolutely insane, and it's all on our client portal, so you'll get access to that. Come and have a chat with myself and the team at Atlas Property Group. We've got that end of financial year deal going, $1,500 off, but chat to us about the T's and C's. And you want to work with one of Channel 9's new people on the network, come and have a chat with us, right, guys? atlaspropertygroup.com.au. But until next time, guys, thanks for tuning in, and we can't wait to be back with you and sharing more insights.
This is a Piccolo podcast production.